We just got done watching the second episode of season 6 of The Expanse called Azure Dragon. And this was such a change from last week's. Last week's, in the video that we posted, I was not happy with pretty much anything. I mean, there were a few pieces of it that felt like they could be interesting, but it didn't feel right. The belters didn't feel right. The way it looked didn't feel right. Nothing about it felt right. And today I was dreading watching episode 2. And the first thing that we noticed when we started the episode, when the credits started rolling, was the writers.
Yeah, this episode was actually written by Ty Frank and Daniel Abraham. And obviously, they're the writing duo, James S.A. Corey, who actually wrote the original source material. And you can tell when they're the ones who wrote the episode versus when it's a television writer. Because these guys, they don't include all sorts of weird extra drama that really isn't necessary in the episode. They tell a tight story. And this episode was a return to the tight story, thank God. I mean, last week, oh God, it was so overdramatic. It was awful. I hated last week's episode.
Drummer didn't feel right. The belters didn't feel right. And this week, this was such a lovely change. This reminded me why I love The Expanse. There's all these little things that felt right. The musical cues felt right. Drummer in particular. I complained last week about Drummer just not feeling right. And they nailed her this episode. That was Drummer. Her speech patterns are very unique. She uses short sentences, very measured talk. And obviously she has an attitude when she talks. And it's the belter accent. That's the biggest thing I noticed. Last week, I don't remember if they even included a belter accent. If they did, it was very light. This week, the belter accent was very heavy. And it felt right. Everything felt right. Avasarala, although last week she was okay, this week she felt like herself. Last week she was wearing, it's probably a minor thing, but she had like this pleather matrix outfit on that just didn't feel right. This week, it felt like an Avasarala outfit. The crew of the Rocinante, they all were interacting normally. Bobby was on the ship with them. She felt like normal. I can't express how happy I am. This episode felt like The Expanse again.
In this episode, we saw Avasarala using that reporter, Monica Stewart, trying to get her to write stories about the people who have died and how the Belters' war on Earth has impacted Earthers. And this is the manipulative Avasarala that we all know and love, which was great to see her again. And it was nice to see them actually developing the Clarissa Mao character, because last week she was really just a walk-on character, which was disappointing. This week we got a lot more of that. Naomi seemed to be her usual sulky self.
But at least she wasn't picking fights with people.
No, and in parallel, we saw her son feeling a lot of remorse for killing his friend. And we saw so much more character development in this episode than we did in the previous episode. I can see why people would say, oh, well, last week was just a recap to get us all caught up. But, last week it didn't feel right. Even for a recap, it didn't feel right. It felt like I was watching a soap opera.
Yeah, it felt like it was bad fan fiction.
Yeah, it did.
Because The Expanse, at its best, it's hard to explain unless you are a fan of The Expanse, the TV show. But there's a certain thickness to the atmosphere when you're watching it. It's hard to explain. It's the way the camera shots are, the lighting is, the musical cues, the way the characters, their dialogues are with each other.
Well, their dialect as well.
And and it was all missing in the first episode. It felt, I started to wonder, is this like a pandemic reshoot or something, the first episode?
I don't know. I just chalked it up to Naren Shankar being a television writer, and in this instance, Ty Frank and Daniel Abraham, who would be better or a bigger expert in the Belter lingo than they would be. Nobody. So I think that's just why this episode was just so much better than last week's.
And it was Amos, it was hilarious in a good way, because one of the fun things about Amos is he's very blunt. And there was this scene toward the end where Holden wanted to talk to Clarissa, and he's like, is it okay if I talk to her? Because she was in a medical chair. And then it was like, sure. And then Holden was staring at him because the implication was, I'd like to talk to her alone. But since he didn't say those words, just Amos sat there and just there was awkward silence for like 10 seconds. And then Holden basically said, whatever. And he just started talking to Clarissa. Mm-hmm. That's like just that little thing. I know it's just a little thing, but that's Amos. That was missing last week. That little thing was missing.
Well, it's those little things that make your characters unforgettable. And that was missing from last week's episode. In this week's episode, I guess we should just cover what started at the beginning. We saw that little girl on that planet that's through the ring. And the little bird that she was trying to save, we saw that it died. And when she tried to... she was going to bury it. Some other creature came out of the woods and stole the body. So we don't know what's going to happen there. The other big things that happened, Marco and Eros covered up the fact that his son murdered somebody. And his son is feeling a lot of guilt about that.
And the way they portrayed him in this episode, he felt like a smooth-talking, intelligent, resistance rebel type person, which is what he's supposed to be, unlike last week where I don't know what they were trying to make him be.
Well, last week he felt like some sort of narcissistic megalomaniac, and that didn't match with the smooth-talking con man
intelligent
that we'd
con
seen
man
in previous seasons. This week he actually felt like himself again. Which was really good.
He felt dangerous.
Well, yeah. Well, he didn't feel like a mustache-twirling villain this week. He actually felt like a complex character that you could kind of understand what his intentions were and where he was coming from on things. Last week, he just seemed like an unreasonable, crazy person. So did his son. This week, fortunately, they appeared to have a lot more depth than that. And this is what we are used to seeing in previous seasons. As I said, last week's episode, not very good. This week's episode, a whole hell of a lot better. So he covered up for his son, and his son's back on duty, but feeling a great deal of remorse for what he did. We also saw that the Rocinante crew took that ship that Marco and Eros was using to activate the asteroids that they were flinging at Earth. So that avenue for attacking the Earth is now gone for them. So now the Earth Navy and the Mars Navy are going to be freed up to attack the belt. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens from here on out.
And they picked up some intelligence. I think that was that where the locations of their...
all the asteroids were.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. So it's going to be interesting. So the real battle is going to be coming to an Aros now.
I have a ton of praise for this episode. However, the one regret I have is in this series, S.A. Corey seemed to understand like milestones in human history. So even though it was in flashback, we got to see the Epstein drive, the fusion drive that they used to power the solar system travel.
Yes.
And obviously we got to see the first contact with alien life with the protomolecule. Mm-hmm. The one thing that felt so weird to me is we saw that planet through the ring that the little girl was on with her two, I'm guessing that was her parents. Mm-hmm. And, like, there were these birds and, like, this, I don't know, cat-like, wolf-like creature. And the one thing that I thought they missed in presenting so we could experience the joy of it, of experiencing it for the first time, I might be wrong, because on Ilus, I think the only life on that planet that was a dead planet was the protomolecule stuff. So, if I'm remembering correctly, this is the first time we've seen life outside of our solar system.
Yes.
And we didn't get to experience it for the first time. Their first experience with life outside of the solar system. And that just felt like I was robbed of something, like I'm missing something.
I also looked, and it appears that there's only going to be 6 episodes this season, and I believe this is the final season. It really feels like this must be some sort of truncated information dump in some ways to finish up the story, which is unfortunate because, yeah, I feel the same way. We were robbed of that experience of seeing humanity coming in contact with alien life for the very first time. Because as far as I'm concerned, proto-molecule doesn't count.
Because that could have been a great moment. I mean, they understood about us experiencing the first time that fusion drive, that Epstein drive was fired up. Mm-hmm. They let us experience in that. It was a flashback, but we still got to experience it. We got to experience the first contact, maybe not ever with the proto-molecule, because obviously it was found before the TV series got going. But we got to see one of the first stages. We got to see the first interstellar travel of going through the ring. That was another momentous milestone in human history.
Yeah.
And I just felt like it would have been so interesting to see that colony ship land on that planet and for them to walk out and see not only the animals, but the plants, and then they have those birds and whatever that cat will. I mean, that should have been a huge deal because that's the first time outside our solar system life was encountered.
Yep.
And we didn't get to see it. We just, we have a scene where it just kind of goes over to that planet, and they're already on that planet. I'm guessing they've been there for a while because they're letting the little girl run around.
It appeared to be so, yeah. And it seemed weird to me that those parents would allow their children to run around unescorted in the woods like that on an alien planet. That just seems very irresponsible, to say the least.
Well, that wolf thing looks like it was big enough to eat her.
It was big enough to eat her, most definitely.
That's why I'm guessing they were on that planet for a while. Mm-hmm. So we missed that whole learning about all that life on that planet. And I just felt like I was robbed.
Yeah.
However, that's the only negative I have of this episode. The rest of it was a wonderful surprise because I was dreading watching this episode. And after we got into it for like 10 minutes, there was a big old smile on my face. And like, I'm reinvigorated watching the rest of this season. I'm hoping that the page you found that listed only 6 episodes, I'm hoping that that's just the 6 they know about, because the previous seasons had like 10 episodes or 15 episodes. Because if this is the last season, and I'm pretty sure it is, 6 episodes, and that first one was a waste. That was just a recap.
Yeah.
So basically 5 episodes to cover the rest of what they can cover this series. If that's all there is, that's going to be disappointing. And I truly hope, if that's the case, that S.A. Corey are involved in the rest of these episodes.
Yeah, I certainly hope so. One last thing I wanted to mention was that I noticed that Marco Inaro's uniform, on the sleeve it said Icarus, and on the front was a bird with its wings spread. And I just, I found that symbolism to be interesting, given that Icarus was warned not to fly too close to the sun with his wax wings. And when he did, they melted and he fell to the ground and died. I find that to be very interesting, and I have a feeling that that's symbolic of what's going to happen to Marco Inaros.
And I guess to add on to that, the thing I enjoyed about this episode, and just The Expanse in general versus last week, when The Expanse is at its best, the TV series, I feel like it is directing its content squarely at adult minds. Mm-hmm. So as an adult, you are trying to figure out the riddles, but you're trying to figure them out because you're going against an opponent, that the opponent being the writers, that are as smart or smarter than you. Mm-hmm. So it's a contest of trying to unravel the mysteries going on, and that's a fun game to play. And last week, it felt like it was aimed at middle school kids or something. I mean, for me, it felt so dumbed down that's part of The Expanse. I always felt like I was being challenged.
Yes.
And last week, it was so disappointing. It felt like it was going after somebody who was like in middle school or something. And I'm not exaggerating at all.
Yep, this week, so much better. So if you watched last week and you were disappointed like we were, give this week's episode another try.
Definitely.
Because this week, It was so much better than last week. This is The Expanse. Do you have anything else to say about that?
Nope, I'm happy. Looking forward to next week.
Yeah, me too. So let us know in the comments what you guys thought. And thank you for listening.